The first drop of red wine hit my wedding dress like a gunshot. I remember the sound before the colour, the wet, soft plop against silk, followed by the collective gasp of 200 guests. The stain spread fast, blooming outward like a wound that had been waiting for years to open. "Oh my God," my mother-in-law said, one manicured hand flying to her chest. "I'm so clumsy." She didn't sound sorry. She sounded satisfied. The dress was handmade, not designer, not store-bought. I had sewn it myself late at night after double shifts, my fingers pricked raw because I refused to ask anyone, especially her, for help. Ivory silk, lace sleeves, a modest neckline she had called matronly when she thought I couldn't hear. Now a violent red splash bled down the bodice, soaking into hours of invisible labour. Someone laughed, nervously. Someone else whispered, "Oh no." My husband Daniel froze beside me. He didn't reach for me. He didn't say my name. He just stared at the stain like it was an inconvenience, not an assault. And my mother-in-law, Margaret Whitmore, set the crystal wineglass down with deliberate care. "I warned her not to wear white," she said lightly to the table nearest the aisle. "At her age, it's a little optimistic." Laughter followed. Real laughter this time. I stood there 46 years old, humiliated in front of friends, colleagues, and relatives who had watched me spend decades being useful, quiet, accommodating. The woman who brought casseroles, who remembered birthdays, who paid bills on time and never raised her voice. The furniture, the burden. The woman whose presence was tolerated, but never celebrated. The wedding planner rushed forward. "We can. Maybe we can blot it." "No," Margaret said quickly. "Let's not make a scene." She smiled at me then. Up close I could smell her perfume, jasmine and something sharp underneath, like panic masked by luxury. "I'm sure she understands," she said. "Accidents happen." Her eyes locked onto mine. This was not an accident. This was a message. People think humiliation happens in one moment. They're wrong. It's a slow erosion. For 23 years, I had bent myself smaller for that family. I married Daniel young, pregnant, scared, grateful someone wanted me. Margaret took one look at my thrift store coat and decided I was a temporary mistake, something her son would outgrow once he found his footing. But I stayed. I worked. I raised our daughter Lily. I cooked Sunday dinners in Margaret's kitchen while she corrected my recipes and told guests how her son had turned out so well despite everything. I paid into the family trust without ever seeing the paperwork. "It's complicated," Margaret would say, waving me off. "You wouldn't understand." And I didn't push. Because pushing was dangerous, because peace had a price, and I always paid it. Until the night I found the bank statements. 6 months before the wedding, Margaret asked me to help organize some old files. She was going on a cruise. Daniel was busy. Lily was at college. I sat alone in Margaret's study, surrounded by leather-bound books she had never read, the air smelling faintly of dust and old money. I wasn't snooping. I was filing. Then I saw numbers that didn't make sense. Withdrawals. Large ones. Repeated. Offshore transfers. Accounts opened and closed like doors slammed in a hurry. The family trust, Daniel's inheritance, Lily's future was bleeding. My hands shook as I followed the paper trail. Casino names, private lenders, cash advances masked as consulting fees. Margaret Whitmore was gambling. And losing. I made copies, quietly, carefully, the way a woman does when she's learned survival before confrontation. I didn't tell Daniel, not yet, because something in me had changed. Not anger, clarity, cold, precise, unforgiving. The red wine continued to sink into my dress as Margaret dabbed at it theatrically with a napkin, making it worse. "Oh dear," she murmured. "It's ruined." The officiant cleared his throat. Guests shifted. Cameras flashed. Everyone waited for me to cry. I didn't. Instead, I stepped forward, away from Daniel, away from the altar, and asked calmly, "May I use the microphone?" Margaret stiffened. The wedding planner hesitated. "Ma'am, I paid for this wedding," I said evenly. "I'll speak." A murmur rippled through the room. I took the microphone. It was heavier than I expected. Solid. Real. The red stain was warm against my skin. I looked directly at Margaret and smiled. People don't notice when a woman slowly vanishes. There is no announcement, no ceremony, no one rings a bell to mark the moment you stop being seen and start being used. You simply become convenient, predictable, quiet, furniture. By the time Margaret spilled that wine on my wedding dress, I had already been disappearing for decades. When I first married Daniel, I was 23 and already exhausted. Life had taught me early that love was conditional. You earned it by being agreeable, by not asking for too much, by apologizing even when you didn't know what you'd done wrong. Margaret understood this instinct immediately. She never raised her voice at me, never openly insulted me. That would have been crude. Instead, she perfected the art of the polite dismissal. "Oh, you brought dessert," she'd say, peeking under the foil of my dish. "How sweet. I already ordered something from the bakery, of course, but we'll keep this in the kitchen." Or, "You must be tired after work. Why don't you sit this conversation out? The adults are discussing finances." The adults. I worked full-time as an accounts administrator. I balanced ledgers worth more than Margaret's entire house every single day. But in her home, I was treated like a child who might spill juice on important papers. Daniel never corrected her. That hurt more than anything she ever said. When Lily was born, I thought things might change. Surely motherhood would earn me respect. Surely producing the next generation of Whitmores would elevate me from outsider to insider. Instead, it made me indispensable and therefore invisible. I handled night feedings, school forms, doctor appointments, birthday gifts for his relatives, holiday planning, emotional labor so constant I didn't realize it was labor at all. Margaret would sweep in for the photo moments. "Oh, my granddaughter," she'd croon, lifting Lily from my arms as if I were a babysitter paid to fade into the background. "She has our family's cheekbones." "Ah? Not yours? Never yours." At holidays, I cooked while Margaret hosted. She accepted compliments I earned and redirected criticism toward me with surgical grace. "The turkey's a bit dry," someone would whisper. Margaret would sigh sympathetically. "She tries." Daniel would squeeze my knee under the table, a silent plea. "Don't make this awkward." So I smiled. I always smiled. Money was the unspoken axis around which everything in that family rotated. The Whitmore Family Trust existed in theory long before I ever saw proof of it. It was mentioned the way people mention weather, constantly, vaguely, and with the assumption that I had no control over it. "That's trust money," Margaret would say. "That's not your concern. You wouldn't understand the structure." At first, I believed her. Then I learned better. When Daniel lost his job during the recession, it wasn't the trust that saved us. It was my paycheck, my overtime, my skipped lunches and delayed dentist appointments. Still, Margaret insisted on managing everything. "It's for the family," she said. "Someone responsible has to oversee it." Responsible. I bit my tongue so often it became second nature. The cracks didn't appear with drama. They appeared with fatigue. I turned 40 and realized no one had asked me what I wanted in years. Not Daniel, not Lily, not Margaret. I existed in reaction to other people's needs. One night, standing in the kitchen long after everyone else had gone to bed, I caught my reflection in the microwave door. Lines around my eyes, shoulders slumped forward like I was bracing for a blow that never quite landed, but always threatened to. I thought, is this it? Is this the reward for being good? When Daniel died, suddenly, unfairly, the world expected me to fall apart. I did not. I handled funeral arrangements. I comforted Lily. I managed paperwork while Margaret wept theatrically and told anyone who would listen how hard this was for her. "My son," she sobbed. "My poor son." No one asked about my husband. After the funeral, Margaret tightened her grip. "Now more than ever," she said, patting my hand, "you'll need guidance." What she meant was control. She insisted the trust remain under her management until Lily was older. She framed it as protection, as generosity. Daniel had left no will beyond what Margaret herself had arranged years earlier. I was stunned by how little he had prepared and how much he had assumed would simply work out. For the first time, I felt anger sharp enough to taste. But I swallowed it, because Lily needed stability. Because grief makes cowards of women who are already tired. When Lily announced her engagement, Margaret acted as if the sun had risen solely for her benefit. "Our family wedding," she kept saying, "not Lily's wedding. Certainly not mine. The dress, the venue, the guest list. Everything was decided before Lily even realised decisions were being made. And I offered help quietly. Budget spreadsheets, vendor comparisons, timelines. Margaret waved me off. "I have it handled." But then the bills started arriving. To me. Because somewhere along the way I had become the silent financial safety net. I paid without complaint, until the numbers didn't add up. The night I found the bank statements, I didn't feel victorious. I felt awake. There's a difference. I sat in Margaret's study, the only sound the ticking of an expensive clock, and realised the truth with brutal clarity. She didn't see me as weak. She saw me as harmless. That was worse. Harmless women are ignored, exploited, trusted with secrets no one believes they'll ever use. I gathered evidence not with rage, but with methodical calm. Years of experience balancing accounts had trained me for this moment better than any courtroom drama ever could. I didn't confront her. I didn't warn Daniel. I didn't panic. For the first time in my life, I waited. Not out of fear, but strategy. When Lily asked if I'd sew my own wedding dress for the ceremony, something symbolic, something meaningful, Margaret smirked openly. "At your age," she said. "Well, if it makes you feel special." It did. Not because of vanity. Because every stitch was mine. Every seam was intentional. I chose ivory instead of white, not out of shame, but honesty. I wasn't pretending to be untouched. I was claiming survival. Margaret hated that. Women like her thrive on unspoken hierarchies, on knowing exactly where everyone stands. And I had quietly stepped out of line. On the morning of the wedding, Margaret kissed my cheek and told me I looked presentable. I thanked her. I had copies of bank statements in my clutch. I had spoken to a lawyer weeks earlier under the guise of estate clarification. I knew exactly what would happen once the truth came out. Margaret did not. She thought humiliation would break me. She thought public shame would make me fold, apologize, retreat. She had no idea I had already left the role she'd written for me. So when that wine hit my dress, when the guests laughed and Daniel froze, I felt something unexpected bloom in my chest. Not fear. Relief. Because the moment had finally arrived. And I was done disappearing. There is a precise moment when fear loses its authority. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks or fury. It arrives quietly, like a door clicking shut behind you. 1 second you're wondering how to keep the peace. The next, you realize peace was never yours to keep. I crossed that threshold weeks before the wedding, long before red wine touched silk, on a grey Tuesday afternoon in a lawyer's office that smelled faintly of old books and burnt coffee. I told Margaret I was going to the dentist. She nodded absently, already scrolling on her phone. Control only works when the controlled are predictable. I had been predictable for so long she didn't even bother looking up. The law office sat above a bakery. The scent of warm bread drifted through the stairwell, grounding me. I remember thinking how strange it was that something so ordinary could exist alongside the quiet dismantling of a woman's empire. The lawyer's name was Eleanor Price. She was in her late 60s, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and unimpressed by nervous apologies. When I began explaining, hesitant, careful, still halfway expecting to be told I was overreacting, she raised a hand. "Stop," she said gently. "Start from the numbers." So I did. And as I spoke, I felt something inside me straighten. Eleanor didn't interrupt. She read every page slowly, her pen hovering above yellow legal pads, filled with neat handwriting. When I finished, she leaned back and exhaled through her nose. "This isn't mismanagement," she said. "This is embezzlement." The word landed heavy. I had known it, felt it, but hearing it spoken aloud was different. It gave shape to years of quiet imbalance, of money disappearing while Margaret played the role of benevolent matriarch. "She's gambling," I said. "I think." Eleanor nodded. "I know." I blinked. "You what?" "She has a reputation," Eleanor said. "Not public, not documented. But patterns leave footprints." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Margaret had always acted untouchable, above consequence, immune to scrutiny. She wasn't. She had just never been challenged. Eleanor closed the folder and looked directly at me. "Why haven't you stopped her?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. "Because how do you explain a lifetime of yielding? How do you condense years of silence into a reason that sounds rational?" "She's family," I said finally. Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. "No," she corrected. "She's a fiduciary." That distinction cracked something open. A fiduciary. A role. A responsibility. A legal obligation. Not a queen. Not a god. Just a woman hiding behind sentiment to excuse theft. "You have standing," Eleanor continued, "more than you realize." The trust documents were dense, layered with language designed to intimidate anyone without formal training. But I had spent 23 years navigating corporate accounts. I understood leverage. Margaret had never updated beneficiary designations after Daniel's death. She had assumed I wouldn't notice. Because of that oversight, I was not just a bystander. I was a gatekeeper. Eleanor slid a single document across the desk. "With this," she said, "you can freeze accounts." My heart pounded. "And if I do?" "She'll panic," Eleanor replied. "People who gamble always do when the money stops flowing." I imagined Margaret's composure cracking, the tight smile slipping, the tremor beneath the perfume and pearls. For the first time, the image didn't scare me. It steadied me. Eleanor assumed I would act immediately. I didn't. Revenge driven by emotion is sloppy. I had lived under Margaret's rule long enough to know she would spin any confrontation into martyrdom. I needed witnesses. Context. Timing. The wedding was perfect. Public. Symbolic. Saturated with people who believed Margaret was generous, dignified, untouchable. I would let her expose herself. All I had to do was stand still. Waiting was harder than acting. Margaret grew increasingly cruel as the wedding approached, subtle digs sharpened into public jabs. "She's sensitive," she told guests, gesturing towards me. "Grief changes people." I smiled and poured wine. I let her believe she was winning. Every insult was another rope she tied around herself. People later asked why the dress mattered so much. It wasn't about fabric. It was about authorship. I had made something beautiful without permission. Margaret despised that. So when she spilled the wine, deliberate, calculated, devastating, she expected tears. What she didn't expect was recognition. I saw the move for what it was. A final attempt to assert dominance. She had no idea she had already lost. Standing at the microphone, red bleeding into ivory, I felt the room lean toward me. Curiosity. Pity. Anticipation. Margaret's eyes were bright with triumph. Daniel whispered my name. I didn't look at him. I thought of Eleanor's calm voice, the weight of the documents in my clutch, the quiet strength of choosing myself after decades of deferral. This wasn't about humiliation anymore. This was about truth. "I want to thank everyone for coming," I said, my voice steady. Margaret relaxed. Gratitude was familiar territory. Then I continued. "And I want to apologize for something that has gone on for far too long." Her smile faltered. A murmur rippled through the room. I reached into my clutch and felt the reassuring edge of paper. Legal paper. Consequential paper. "I've spent years believing silence was kindness," I said. "That endurance was love." I met Margaret's gaze. I was wrong. Something changed in the air. Not drama. Focus. People straightened. Phones lowered. Conversations stopped. Margaret's hand tightened around her glass. "This is neither the time nor the place," she hissed softly. I smiled at her. "This is exactly the place." I wasn't shaking. That scared her more than shouting ever could. I spoke clearly, slowly, the way you do when you want every word to land. "Over the past several years, funds from the Whitmore Family Trust have been misappropriated." Gasps. Margaret laughed. Too loud, too fast. "Don't be ridiculous," she said. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I replied. "I work with numbers for a living." I held up the first document. "And so does the law." Margaret looked around the room, searching for allies. She found none. Because suddenly I wasn't furniture. I was evidence. Silence is never truly silent. It breathes. It tightens. It waits. The room, filled moments earlier with laughter, clinking glasses, the polite hum of celebration, collapsed inward on itself. I could hear the air conditioning kick on, the faint buzz of the microphone, the distant cry of a baby someone had forgotten to take outside. Margaret stood frozen across from me, her wineglass hovering inches above the table, red liquid trembling inside it like a living thing. "You're confused," she said sharply, the mask snapping back into place. "Grief does terrible things to a woman's mind." A few people nodded reflexively. She had trained them well. I tilted my head, studying her the way I once studied spreadsheets, looking for inconsistencies, for the places where the story stopped adding up. "That's an interesting defense," I said calmly, "given that the withdrawals began 3 years before Daniel died." A ripple moved through the crowd. Margaret blinked. "Once." I placed the first folder on the podium. Thick, organized, labeled, not emotional, not vindictive, as professional. "This," I said, tapping it lightly, "is a chronological record of transfers from the Whitmore Family Trust into 3 private accounts held solely in Margaret Whitmore's name." A sharp inhale cut through the room. Margaret laughed again, but this time there was no music in it. "Anyone can fabricate papers." I nodded. "That's true." I opened the folder. "Which is why these copies were pulled directly from the Trust's financial institution, with timestamps and notarized verification." Her hand shook now. She set the glass down too hard. Wine sloshed over the rim, dripping onto the white linen tablecloth. Red on white again. Poetic, really. "Mom," Daniel said hoarsely, "is this true?" I felt something tighten in my chest, not satisfaction, not triumph, but a quiet sadness. He had spent his whole life protected by her shadow. Now it was devouring him too. Margaret turned on him instantly. "After everything I've done for you," she snapped, "you're going to listen to her." Her finger sliced through the air toward me like a blade. There it was, I said softly into the microphone. That word. Confusion flickered across faces. "Her," I repeated. "Not your daughter-in-law, not Lily's mother, just her." I closed the folder. For years I let that slide. I looked directly at Daniel. "I won't anymore." I reached into my clutch again and pulled out a second packet. This one thinner. Meaner. Here are the casino records, I said. VIP accounts, credit extensions, markers signed under assumed business names. Margaret lunged forward. You had no right. I had every right, I interrupted. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. As a beneficiary, as an accountant, and as the woman who has been quietly paying the bills while you gambled away your grandchildren's future. A woman near the front covered her mouth. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Margaret's face drained of colour so fast I thought she might faint. I took a breath. This was the fulcrum. Earlier this morning, I said, with legal counsel present, I exercised my authority to freeze all remaining trust assets. Pandemonium erupted. What? She can't do that. This is insane, Margaret screamed. Actually screamed. You stupid ungrateful. Do you have any idea what you've done? I did. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't apologizing for it. Yes, I said. I do. Margaret's composure shattered. Not cracked. Shattered. You planned this, she hissed. You waited, you set me up. I nodded slowly. Yes. The honesty stunned her more than denial ever could. I waited until you were comfortable, I continued, until you thought I was harmless, until you thought the world would never look at me twice. I gestured to the room. Now they're looking. Her social circle, the women who had lunch with her, vacationed with her, praised her generosity, were staring at her like strangers. Because they were her. Power only exists as long as belief does. The venue manager approached cautiously. Mum, he said to Margaret, we're going to have to ask you to step aside. This is my family, she shrieked. The irony tasted bitter and sweet all at once. She had never treated me like family. Now she wanted the privilege. Margaret tried to grab Daniel's arm. He stepped back. That movement, small, instinctive, was the real end. Grandmother, Lily said quietly. Everyone turned. My daughter stood, pale but steady. I saw the emails, she continued. You used my college fund. Margaret opened her mouth. No sound came out. I trusted you, Lily said, and you lied. That was it. No courtroom, no gavel. Just a granddaughter choosing truth over blood. Margaret sagged into a chair, suddenly very old, very small. I leaned closer to the microphone. There's one more thing, I said. A collective groan rippled through the room, not impatience, anticipation. The trust property, I continued. The house everyone assumes Margaret owns? I paused. I do. The room exploded. Daniel stared at me in disbelief. Margaret's head snapped up. That's impossible. No, I said. It's documented. Daniel transferred ownership to me after the refinancing, something you arranged but never reviewed. I smiled sadly. You taught me that people don't read what they think they control. Yes, there was applause. I didn't expect it. It wasn't loud at first, just a few claps. Then more. Not for revenge, for revelation, for watching a woman finally stop shrinking. Margaret was escorted out through a side door shouting about lawyers and betrayal and ungrateful women. No one followed her. I stepped down from the podium. My dress was ruined. My hands smelled faintly of paper and wine. Daniel approached me, eyes red. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. I thought about all the times he hadn't asked. I'm telling you now, I said. That was enough. For today. Later, alone in the dressing room, I unzipped the dress slowly. The red stain had dried, dark and permanent. I touched it gently. Some things can't be cleaned. Some things shouldn't be. I looked at my reflection. Older, yes. Worn. But unmistakably present. For the first time in decades, I knew exactly who I was. And I wasn't disappearing anymore. Power doesn't vanish in a dramatic explosion. It leaks. It drains. It leaves behind a hollow echo where certainty once lived. Margaret's power began dissolving the moment the side door closed behind her at the wedding. The sound of its soft final followed her far longer than the shouts she hurled down the hallway. I didn't chase her. I had spent too many years running after people who never ran toward me. I woke the next morning in the house everyone assumed was hers. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that drifted lazily in the air, unaware that an empire had collapsed overnight. I brewed coffee slowly, deliberately. The smell, dark, bitter, grounding, filled the kitchen. For the first time, I drank it at the table instead of standing at the counter, ready to be interrupted. My phone buzzed non-stop. Messages, voicemails, emails. I ignored them all. Margaret had trained me to respond immediately, to smooth things over, to fix discomfort. That training expired. Eleanor arrived at noon with a slim briefcase and the calm confidence of someone who has seen worse. "They've frozen her personal accounts," she said, setting the case down, "and the casinos are cooperating." I closed my eyes briefly. Not relief. Release. "She's threatening to sue," Eleanor added dryly. I laughed. It startled me. A real laugh. Rusty but real. "Let her," I said. Margaret's social circle unravelled faster than I expected. The women who once defended her stopped returning calls. Luncheons were quietly cancelled, invitations rescinded with vague excuses. People are loyal to power, not people. And Margaret had neither anymore. A friend forwarded me a screenshot of a group chat. "Best to distance ourselves until things are clarified." Clarified. As if theft becomes acceptable once phrased politely. 2 weeks later, the charges were filed. Embezzlement, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty. Words Margaret once wielded like weapons now pinned her in place. She was released on bail. The newspapers were careful, discreet. But discretion didn't stop whispers. Or the way people looked away when she entered a room. Daniel moved out quietly. No shouting, no drama. Just suitcases placed by the door, the absence of his shoes by the entryway where they had always lived. "I don't know who she is anymore," he said, not meeting my eyes. I thought of all the times I'd said nothing. "I do," I replied gently. He nodded. Understanding comes late to those who never had to look. She tried to return to the house. My house! She stood on the porch, impeccably dressed, eyes blazing with fury and disbelief. "You can't do this," she said. "I already did," I answered from the doorway. The locks had been changed. The alarm reset. The boundary drawn. She stared at me for a long moment, searching for the woman she used to dismiss. She didn't find her. "This isn't over," she whispered. "It is for me," I said. I closed the door. Margaret avoided prison through a settlement. Restitution, auntie, mandatory counselling. A lifetime ban from managing any financial assets. For someone like her, it was worse than incarceration. She was no longer trusted, and trust had been her true currency. Lily changed her last name, not out of anger, out of clarity. "I need distance," she said. I understood. Distance saves lives. I gained quiet. I gained mornings without dread. I gained the ability to sit with my thoughts without bracing for impact. I travelled. I painted badly and joyfully. I ate peach cobbler for breakfast because I wanted to. Here is the truth no one teaches women like me. Endurance is not virtue when it costs you yourself. Love without boundaries is not love, it's erasure. And silence does not keep the peace. It keeps the oppressor comfortable. I lost a dress. I gained a life. Peace is not loud. It doesn't arrive with applause or vindication. It slips in quietly like, evening light through a clean window and settles into the corners of your life you forgot could feel warm. For a long time after everything ended, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't, because the chaos had never been fate. It had been Margaret. The first weeks alone felt wrong. Too quiet. No urgent phone calls, no carefully worded crises, no emotional fires I was expected to put out before my coffee cooled. I kept waking early out of habit, bracing myself for demands that no longer came. Then one morning, I slept in. When I woke, sunlight spilled across the bed. My body felt heavy, not with dread, but rest, the kind that seeps into bones when they're finally allowed to stop guarding themselves. I lay there and cried, not out of grief, and out of relief. I repainted the house, not because it needed it, because I did. I chose soft blues and warm creams. I opened windows Margaret kept shut. I replaced heavy curtains with light ones that moved when the wind passed through. Every change was a quiet declaration. I am here. I decide. I remain. I donated the furniture she chose, kept only what felt like mine. Ownership, I learned, is as emotional as it is legal. Months later, Daniel asked to talk. We met at a small cafe, neutral ground. The smell of espresso and cinnamon hung in the air, familiar but no longer loaded with obligation. I should have seen it, he said. I should have protected you. I studied his face, the man I once loved, the man who had failed me not through cruelty but comfort. Yes, I said. It wasn't cruel. It was honest. He nodded, swallowing hard. I don't expect forgiveness, he added. I'm not withholding it, I replied. I'm just not centering you anymore. That was new. For both of us. I saw Margaret once more. At a grocery store. No pearls, no perfume cloud, no entourage. She looked smaller, older, human. Our eyes met briefly. She looked away first. Power never survives accountability. I never threw the dress away. I folded it carefully and placed it in a box. Not as a symbol of pain, as proof. The stain remained, a dark reminder that not all damage is meant to be erased. Some marks are milestones. I volunteer at a community centre teaching financial literacy to women who've spent their lives being told they wouldn't understand. They do. They always did. No one had just trusted them with the truth. I see myself in them. The hesitation, the careful phrasing, the instinct to apologise before asking for space. I tell them this. You are not difficult, you are discerning. If you remember anything from my story, remember this. Love should never require your disappearance. Respect that must be begged for is not respect. And boundaries are not walls, they are doors you control. I was underestimated because I allowed myself to be. I was powerful the moment I stopped asking for permission to exist. Some mornings, I still drink coffee at the table. The house hums softly around me. The world feels wide again. I am older. I am wiser. I am no one's furniture. And I am finally fully free.